Greetings, friends, and welcome back to the Musings from the Mount podcast. I'm your host, Joseph Carenza. In today's episode, we explore the essential distinction between happiness, joy, and bliss. At a time when many question how one can maintain joy amidst global challenges, this timely discussion reveals why joy isn't just a choice, but the natural emanation of the soul itself. We draw from the teachings of the Tibetan Master DK and Agni Yoga, and we explore how to navigate our current global transition with radiant purpose and power. And we explore how true joy emerges through service and group consciousness. And we hope you like the episode. And if you do enjoy this podcast, please consider going to meditationmount.org and donating. Your donation helps us to bring you this podcast, as well as all the other programs the Mount produces, both today and in the future. We're incredibly grateful and honored by your support. Now back to the podcast. Enjoy, which is a special kind of wisdom. There is a tendency, of course, in our current day and age, we're recording this in the latter part of January of 2025, and there's a sentiment, there's a sort of, I don't want to call it malaise, but, we were talking about joy, and this day and age, almost, we've had episodes before where we talked about almost the radical sense of joy, the rebellion of being joyous at a time when maybe the world isn't necessarily joyful. But in talking about joy, it was interesting when we ponder on this. One of the first things you have to do is distinguish between joy, happiness, and bliss. And I think sometimes we mix those up because there's a difference between being joyful and being happy. Right. And so how could you be happy in a moment like this is not the same as how can you be joyful in a moment like this. And, we strive to be joyful, as a sense of, as a state of being,
It's a really good point. So basically there are two things you baked into that. One is, how dare you be joyful when the world is suffering and there's so much despair, which I'd like to address because it's often a point that people bring up. And then the other is the distinction between happiness, joy, and bliss. And I'd love to explore that with you, Joey. We can use the ponder on this book, the writings of Alice Bailey. And I'd like to start. I was thinking this morning, because I've often had this said to me, how can you be so joyful? And how can you have a smile on your face when so many people are suffering, when the world is in despair? And as I was reflecting on this today, I suddenly went, joy is not a choice. Joy is the natural emanation of the soul. Sorrow, sadness, despair, despondency are some of the clouds that my personality generates and puts out into the ethers that stop me receiving the emanations of that sun, which is my soul. So it's not a question of why do I choose to be joyful when there's so much despair? It's that sometimes the despair clouds my ability to receive the joy that is the natural state of being of the soul. Very different. Otherwise, it's, how dare you be joyful when everyone is suffering as though you've done something wrong. So by holding it this way, when I was pondering on it this morning, I went, then I didn't do anything right or wrong. The soul is. Just as we say, the soul is in constant meditation, and the soul doesn't need anything to justify itself. It is what it is on its own plane of existence. It's a sun, and the sun naturally emits warmth and light, which is, if you like, a version of joy. And so I wondered, have you run into this situation where people have said, well, you can't be joyful when the world's full of sorrow and sadness?
Absolutely. I mean, that's, I've actually run into that my entire life. I think for me, it was kind of a relentless optimism which didn't make sense necessarily given some of my background, some other things. But it wasn't just that. It was, a sense of joy in just being, and that can be very difficult for a lot of people, and myself included. The various, the cards you get dealt, and how your system works, and people have different chemical imbalances, all kinds of different things. The whole. But I think it talks about that too. Is that despite that, the joy is still something that's there. It's accessible for everyone. Whereas, I think sometimes we mistake it as chasing happiness.
Yes,
because I was saying, because I've spent most of my life, happiness is not something I was striving for, so I it's because it was elusive, but joy, you can find the joy is it's just there like sunlight, so.
Exactly. It is the emission of the soul.
Yeah.
And when we remove the clouds of fear and doubt and despair, then we receive the rays of the sun.
Mm-hmm.
We receive the rays of joy upon us, and it warms us. And it's a whole different way of living when you feel that you're being warmed by this inner sun of joy.
Yeah.
And it doesn't mean that you're not in touch with the sorrow or the sadness, but the sorrow and the sadness you realize for what it is as a temporary state of being.
Mm. Yeah, that's a very good point. It has a lot to do with the way, the context we put on things, our perspective, and like everything, the timelines. If you're just constantly stuck in one moment, or you can't see that there's another moment. I saw an interesting thing about viewing the world the way the surfer does. When you're on the wave, you're in that moment, and even though the moment's going to end, you still enjoy that moment because you know that there's going to be another wave eventually. So it's like it's there's something to that.
Well, maybe it would be useful to actually see what DK differentiates between happiness, and joy and bliss, and then we can take it from there, Joe.
Yeah.
So we're going to read from Ponder on This, which is a compilation of the writings of Alice Bailey. And Alice Bailey, for those of you who are not familiar, took dictation at a distance from the Master DK, who was living in Tibet. He wasn't dead. He wasn't discarnate. He was actually in a physical body in a lamasery just over the border from Nepal into Tibet. And he would communicate telepathically. It's like sending a psychic fax, and Alice Bailey would record it. And it was as simple as that. So I call it taking dictation at a distance. The reason we say this, because people say, oh, he channeled her. No, he didn't channel her. He just was picking up his transmission, just as we would do now. People are listening to this podcast. It's a transmission. She was able to do it real time with another person at a geographical distance. But on an inner level, there is no distance. They were in the same field, the same virtual field. So this is what he wrote. It's helpful to differentiate between happiness, joy, and bliss. First, happiness, which has its seat in the emotions and is a personality reaction. He's not putting it down or saying it's good or bad. He's just saying, no, this is where it comes from. So the pursuit of happiness is like the first rung of this ladder. Yeah. And we go on and we acquire things and try to be happy. And then people realize, I've got all these toys, but I'm still not happy. And so that's when you realize there's more to life than spiritual or the material food. So that was happiness, and we'll come back to it in more depth. Second, joy, which is a quality of the soul and is realized in the mind when alignment takes place. That's what I was saying before, is that the soul is emanating. Joy is an emanation of the soul, and we become aware of it when we register it, when we're aligned.
Right, yeah.
Now, thirdly, bliss, which is the nature of the spirit. So here we've got personality, happiness. we've got joy for the soul, and now we've got bliss, which is the nature of the spirit, and about which speculation is fruitless until the soul realizes its oneness with the Father. And by this, it means the Father aspect, the masculine aspect, the heavenly aspect. It's not about man and woman in this case. And it goes back to what we've touched on before, is that you can't be in touch with this highest bliss, this highest fire. It won't touch you unless you've got a place that can register and receive it, which would then be the heart, the loving heart, or the soul. So the soul is the only fireplace that really can safely house bliss. Well, that's where you can move into bliss. You don't move into bliss from happiness.
Mm-hmm. That makes sense.
Because you can't register it. This realization follows upon an earlier stage wherein the personal self is at one with the soul. It's aligned with the soul, becomes at one with the soul. Therefore, speculation and analysis as to the nature of bliss is profitless to the average person whose metaphors and terminologies must perforce be personal and related to the world of the senses. So does the aspirant, the seeker on the path, refer to his happiness or joy? Mm-hmm. And then he goes on to say, if he refers to the latter, it must come as the effect of group consciousness, of group solidarity, of oneness with all beings, and may not be interpreted in terms of happiness after all. Happiness comes when the personality is meeting with those conditions which satisfy it in one part or other of its lower nature. It comes when there is a sense of physical well-being, of contentment with one's environment or surrounding personalities, or of satisfaction with one's mental opportunities and contexts. Happiness is the goal of the separated self.
Mm.
So here we go back to this journey again, Joe. We keep talking about, like, it's no longer the hero's journey, the one hero on this journey to get there. Mm-hmm. This is a group effort of embodiment.
Mm-hmm. That's what I thought was so interesting and perhaps a little almost counterintuitive about the way that joy is described in these teachings, is that it immediately takes you away from what you think you're talking about and reframes it on the idea that this is not a solo journey. This arises from a sense of group and a sense of oneness with all beings. And like that for me is like, that's like sort of the illuminated joy of a true saint or a true Buddha.
Right. It isn't though happiness is the achievement. I'm thinking of Lord of the Rings and Gollum, my precious.
Yes.
I mean, my precious joy wouldn't be his precious.
Yeah.
Because you can only, this goes back to, it's the collective sun. The emanations of the soul of humanity are registered in the group field, and we sense this collective joy of life. So it's joy is not the result of the acquisition of anything external.
Right.
It's the release of an inner awareness that comes through alignment, as you just said.
Yeah.
I mean, that turns everything on its head, doesn't it?
It does. It does. And it really does make you reevaluate what you think that the word joy means. Like we tend to have sort of a colloquial kind of definition of it, but what it truly means is quite different.
Well, look, you've got the planet Jupiter, which is Jove, the god Jove, and to be jovial is to be Jupiter-like.
Yes. Okay.
And so there is a certain, and Jupiter, of course, is a sacred planet. It's a planet that already is emanating its inner essence, whereas the Earth is still a non-sacred planet, which simply means we reflect and absorb light. We haven't reached a point where we are transmitting the light of the true self of this planet. We're still building towards that point of alignment. So Earth, if you like, at the moment, can handle happiness because we're living more in separation. But the move to joy is also this switch from I to we.
Mm-hmm. Right. Yeah, and we touch on that a lot in this podcast. It's an ongoing theme, ego to eco.
Yeah. So let's read a few more sentences on this and then we see where it leads us. When, however, we seek to live as souls, the contentment of the lower person is discounted, and we find joy in our group relationships and in bringing about those conditions which lead to the better expression of the souls of those we contact. This bringing of joy to others in order to produce conditions in which they may better express themselves may have a physical effect as we seek to better their material conditions, or an emotional effect as our presence brings to them peace and uplift, or an intellectual result as we stimulate them to clarity of thought and understanding. But the effect upon ourselves is joy, for our action has been selfless and non-acquisitive, non-acquiring.
Mm-hmm.
So we don't, the reason we receive things, we don't go out and take them or get them.
Right.
We receive them because we're open to receiving that which already is.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah.
I mean, wow. It turns it all around. So
It does.
It's not the pursuit of joy. It's the revelation of joy more.
Yeah. It's in this ability to selflessly help, others and to be of service. It allows the alignment for joy to come in, and that's a very beautiful idea and concept, and one that is applicable. I mean, I feel that. I feel that.
Well, let's just go back to that point and just carry on,
Yeah.
because it says, "But the effect upon ourselves is joy,
Mm-hmm.
for our outer action has been selfless and non-acquisitive, and not dependent upon the aspirant's circumstance or worldly state.
Mm-hmm.
Much happiness is necessarily foregone when ill health makes its pressure felt, as the environment is difficult and the accumulated karma of many births presses down, or as the troubles of the family, nation, or culture weigh upon the sensitive personality. The happiness of youth, or the self-centered contentment of the selfish, insulated person hiding himself behind the shield of his protective desires, must not be confounded with joy."
Mm.
So, that ain't joy. That's happiness or something masquerading as joy.
Mm-hmm.
It is a platitude as well as an occult paradox to say that in the midst of profound personality distress and unhappiness, the joy of the soul may be known and felt. Such, however, is the case, and it is for this the student must aim.
That part resonated with me, because that was my absolute experience. Even in the most dire times of my life, there was still access to joy. When I was aligned correctly. And it's an interesting lesson because it's going on right now. If you're going to be caught up in strictly looking for physical and material happiness, you're not going to be able to be open to the idea of this overwhelming, unbounding joy that is available. And being of service is exactly what we've been talking about. Like, how can you be of service?
Yeah, exactly. I think when we say we're standing at the threshold of a new era, we talked about moving from Kali Yuga to Satya Yuga, Kali Yuga being the ending of this current dark age, when all the chickens come home to roost karmically.
Yeah.
That's the nature of Kali Yuga. It's Armageddon, it's the reckoning, it's the apocalypse, the revelation. We're moving into Satya Yuga, the golden age. Aquarius doesn't mean suddenly we wake up and everything is hunky-dory, everything is wonderful. It means we have the opportunity to call forth something new. So what he says about this, he said, "We stand today on the verge of great things. Humanity is on its way with renewed impotence. It stands no longer at the crossroads, but irrevocable decisions have been made, and the human race is moving forward along a path which will lead it eventually into light and peace. It will find its way into, quote, unquote, the peace which passeth understanding. because it will be a peace which is independent of outer conditions and which is not based upon what present humanity defines as peace. As we said before, peace is not the cessation of war. Peace is standing in deep resonance with truth, being true to yourself, being true to life, being true to the call of life. You are at peace when life flows through you in an undistorted manner. So he said, the peace which lies ahead for us is the peace of serenity and of joy. A serenity based upon spiritual understanding and a joy which is untouched by circumstance. This is why we go back to the fact that you don't generate joy. Joy is a natural state, but we often generate conditions that cloud that natural state, like the clouds in the sky block the sun.
Yeah.
So how do we remove the clouds that our personality has created, the doubt, the fear, the suffering, and allow the joy of the soul that is constantly there to shine? So we don't feel bad. Or how can I be joyful in these bad times, in sad times? It's our duty to shine.
Yeah.
It's the opposite. Our duty is to be joyful.
I really love that line, a joy which is untouched by circumstance.
Yeah.
That's a great line.
Yeah. And then he explains, this joy and serenity is not an astral condition, but a soul reaction. So it's an is. It is what is. It's the presence of the soul is joyful. The presence of the soul is loving. The presence of the soul is wise. And when we stand in the presence of the soul, that wisdom and that joy flow through us into the world. We become transmitters of that. Therefore, we can bring the light of joy, the light of wisdom, the light of peace, the light of serenity into the surroundings, not just by putting on a smiley face and walking around, but actually getting rid of our own clouds, working on transmuting our suffering into wisdom, into learning, which is what we've said the Earth Classroom is about. It's the school of hard knocks. It's the school of suffering. And suffering is a signal that says there's a gap between what you're currently living on the outside and the truth of who you are on the inside. And we're here to close that gap. And when you close the gap, you become at one with the soul. When you become at one with the soul, its joy and its radiance are felt in your life. And others can benefit from your shining.
Yeah.
That's how I would think of it. So it says, okay, this joy and serenity is not an astral condition, but a soul reaction. These qualities are not achieved as the result of disciplining the emotional nature, but demonstrate as a natural, automatic reaction of the soul. That's what we've just said. So you don't have to try and cultivate joy.
Right.
Joy is.
Yeah.
You have to reveal it, allow it to be. Allow it to be.
Yeah.
So this is the reward of a definitely achieved alignment. These two qualities of the soul, serenity and joy, are the indications that the soul, the ego, the one who stands alone, is controlling or dominating the personality, circumstance, and all environing conditions of life in the three worlds, physical, emotional, and mental. It goes back to the soul is in control of the outer form. The rider is at one with the horse.
Right. I think for a lot of people who, especially if you haven't really studied this particular section, it's going to be kind of a change up of what you think this all means, joy. And it's like the joy of service. Like how.
Yeah.
If you want to know how be of service, isn't that the secret key?
Well, and the Tibetans said the greatest healer and the greatest teacher, service.
Yeah. Yeah, I find that interesting that, especially traditions, more hands-on traditions, like maybe like a Buddhist tradition or the monks, you go to a monastery and they do quite a bit of work during the day. It just it's just service, service work.
Well, I mean, you go back to Agni Yoga,
Yeah.
labor. Labor, we think, oh my God, labor, like on the chain gang. No, labor is the informing of matter with spirit. It's labor. You're crafting something. The artist labors, but labor is a joy. It's an eternal. So to labor is to be joyful, because you're putting into form the beauty of the soul. It's like, duh. So, and here's an interesting one, because particularly the Judaic Christian tradition, there's always a lot of suffering around. And we've got, in Christianity, we've got the crucifixion. And often people stop there.
Yeah.
So their image of the Christian religion is a person on a cross, not the resurrection and the overcoming of death. So it says, the future holds within its silence other modes of saving humanity. The cup of sorrow and the agony of the cross are well nigh finished. Joy and strength will take their place. Instead of sorrow, we shall have a joy which will work out in happiness and lead eventually to bliss. We shall have strength which will know naught but victory and will not recognize disaster. Only the dawn is with us yet, the dawn of the Aquarian age. The full tide of light is inevitably moving upon its way towards us.
Ooh.
Which is
That's
why
heavy.
this is such a tough time.
Yeah.
Because the skies are still filled with these clouds, these really dark clouds that blot out the fire of hope and joy. And it seems almost a crime to some people. How can you smile when everybody's crying? And rather than, no, it's the smile of the soul that is the light and the salve, the healing balm that is needed for the wounds and the suffering.
Yeah.
Ah,
And that can be a difficult ask, because it's hard to get yourself out of the mundane, so to speak, the everyday.
well, when I walk through a place of suffering, it doesn't mean I'm impervious to it or it doesn't touch me. I register it, I feel it, but it doesn't condition my response to life. It calls forth empathy. It calls forth compassion rather than blocks me from being joyful. And that used to be how I'd function. I better not do this because I'm supposed to be, serious now.
Yeah.
So, Joey, we probably should have a very serious conversation about joy now.
Yes, there you go.
Because these are tough times. We
That's right.
can't have a joyful conversation about joy because...
Well, that's a very good point, because we don't want to be too serious about this. Even though it's
we're not being frivolous.
That's true.
Because frivolous is a personality distortion.
Right.
What we're talking about is, how do we allow the fullness and the presence of the soul to be felt in the three worlds of the incarnated self?
Yeah. And beyond service, I mean, what does that look like on a practical sense? Like, how do we start to cultivate that or allow that, or what does that alignment look like?
Well, maybe we could do a couple more quotes from DK, because he basically says, in these days of world pain, let love and joy equally be keynotes of your life as a group and as individuals, for they carry the healing vibration of the enlightened ones. And then it says, be happy, learn to feel joy, a joy which is based on the knowledge that humanity has always triumphed and passed onward and forward in spite of apparent failures and the destruction of past civilizations. Atlantis, for example. A joy which is founded upon the unshakable belief that all people are souls and that points of crisis are factors which are of proven usefulness in calling in the power of that soul. If we didn't have a crisis, it wouldn't call forth the resources needed to address that crisis.
Okay.
Like when I cut myself, my body rallies to heal that wound.
Mm-hmm. Right.
My soul rallies to bring healing.
Mm. Yeah.
And this is one when you and I both read this at different times and smiled at it.
Yeah.
It says, so many in the final years of life live, think, and act in such a manner that the soul withdraws its attention. Oh, I'm getting old, I'm retired, I've got to do this. And basically, you're unplugging yourself from life.
Yeah.
Thus, only the personality remains.
Mm.
To all of you who have passed the half century, I would say, face the future with the same joy as in youth, yet with an added usefulness, knowing that the wisdom of experience is yours, the power to understand is yours, and that no physical limitation can prevent a soul from useful expression and service.
Mm-hmm.
I would remind you of something which is often forgotten. It is far easier for the soul to express itself through an older, experienced body than through one that is young and inexperienced, provided that there is no pride, no desired selfishness, but only longing to love and to serve, which brings us back to your statement of a few minutes ago.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, this was the passage that really stuck with me. And I found that incredibly, I'm coming up on, I'll be 50 this year, so it's especially poignant. But I also noticed that it's true. The older I get, the more, or I should say, the less concerned I am with my personality. I find I gravitate towards service. I gravitate towards, being part of the whole, part of the group, and I'm less entertained by my own lower processes, and it's true. It's like the joy is starting to kind of chip through in that alignment and that light, and it doesn't have anything to do with happiness. It doesn't have to do with anything with my health or what I'm struggling with, or if I'm, you can probably hear a little bit getting over the respiratory thing that everyone has. We've all just been passing it around to each other. So, but none of that has to really do with a sense of joy of being able to be part of this group and be part of this service. And, I've also found that, that I feel like in some ways, like, we talked a little bit before the podcast, how 50 isn't like it used to be. And that many of us are being called to have like almost a second or third life, whereas before you might just have your one go through, but within one lifetime, we're having these second, third, fourth, almost incarnations.
I actually did a tally last year, and I think I'm at my 9th.
Yeah.
Which means that something shifted where my identity shifted,
mm-hmm.
and my whole outer environment shifted. The way I think, the way I behave shifted. Not hugely, but enough to say, this is the end of one chapter and the beginning of another. Whereas before, as you say, you probably have one chapter, one lifetime.
Mm-hmm.
And now you can get the book done, written
right.
in a lifetime.
You get a trilogy in there.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
So, Joey, we could go on to, there's some affirmations and prayers and meditations on joy, but what else comes to mind, or what else is in your awareness when you think of the request, be joyful?
Yeah, identification, I think, for me comes up because I see this, within my own personal community, our community here, when it's like when you identify too strongly with something that is either super personal or a sort of like one of the lower, and I don't mean lower by like less than, but like one of the, something that's more visceral and emotional, so allowing your whole personality to become wrapped up in something that is really outside of you and not really part of it, like, the group endeavor, and that can sound a little weird, but what does that even mean? And that means like, how am I helping making this place better, And by this place, I mean everything from the universe within my own body to my relationships and friendships, and to my work and to my service. Like, what am I doing on a day-to-day basis to make it better? Am I addressing things that I have the power, to make better? I think that's something we abdicate our power.
Right.
Yeah. So,
Because as we talked about at the beginning of this podcast, if you are just seeking personal happiness, happiness for the self,
yeah.
it's the separated self is looking for its reward. It's going for the prize.
Yeah.
But it can't reach the ultimate prize of joy by itself. Joy is an experience of life, and life is a communion. It's a community.
Yeah, that's again, it's so much of the I to we and the ego to eco, and you don't want to get wrapped up too much in the terminology of that. It's just so obvious to see once you start participating. It's like it's for people who strive to make sure that their children have a better opportunity than they do, or even just like you see someone in your neighborhood who needs a little help, or it's just being outside of yourself for a moment allows a little bit of that joy to come in.
Because anything that moves us towards the betterment of where we are and how we're living is an act of service. And I mentioned Agni Yoga, and there's a phrase that appears all through the Agni Yoga teachings: joy is a special wisdom. And in fact, we have it carved on a bench in our International Garden of Peace, because one of our board members, Alverna Taylor, it was her favorite phrase. And when she passed on, we commissioned the building of a bench in her honor. And that's what we had carved on it. Joy is a special wisdom. So I named Agni Yoga. So let me give you a couple of quotes from Agni Yoga. They're different feel than the ones from the Tibetan.
Yeah.
These have, they're more like reading a poem. And it says, this is taken from the Leaves of Morir's Garden, Master M. Throughout the universe pulsates the fabric of life's beginnings. Throughout the universe is found the worthy garment. Joy quivers and vibrates and resounds. In this garment of joy, you will ascend the steps. This garment will enfold your body. He's basically saying, walk in joy.
Yeah. This thought came in too, that if you think about just the mechanics of the human body, not everything is maybe the most exciting job in the world. I was thinking, the liver and the small lower intestines, their day-to-day job is not the prettiest in the world, but you also have, a great joy can come from that, the system,
From the perspective of a human personality.
Right. That's true.
Because then I judge and compare. It goes back to the pain of comparison. Oh man, I wish I were the heart. I'm only the spleen. Well, in fact, the spleen is like, oh, I want to be the heart, but I'm only the spleen. Well, in fact, the spleen has an amazing function of connecting the etheric body with the physical body. I mean, we only see things in their outer solid form. We don't see the subtle functions of this seamless web of life. And that's so when I think, that job's not good enough for me, one of the best jobs I've ever had, the most satisfying jobs, was raking leaves in a naval cemetery in Sweden, in Stockholm.
Wow.
It was meditation. This was, of course, in the fall when all the surrounding leaves have come down, because there were deciduous trees. But just raking the leaves in a place where there wasn't much happening, because people were.
Yeah.
decomposing under the ground. And the leaves were decomposing.
Yeah.
And I was working with decomposition.
Mm-hmm.
And so I was contemplating, and I felt totally at peace there.
Mm.
Not because there wasn't much noise, but because I was present for that part of life, which is decomposition.
Mm-hmm.
And it was a time to reflect and let go, knowing that new life will be born. And so I've had, like you, I've had so many different quote unquote jobs in my life. But that one gave me a great joy.
Yeah.
I remember it, even though it was cold, but just gently raking leaves in a naval cemetery on an island outside of Stockholm.
Yeah, that sounds nice. Can we go? Yeah.
So, yeah. So we've mentioned Agni Yoga, but he says the experience of joy in one's work is a manifestation of a special aspect of psychic energy. Joyous labor brings success multiplied. I was going back to joyful labor.
Yeah.
So they say, look, when you are joyful, it amplifies and multiplies the gift of what you're doing.
Yeah.
So, I mean, the other thing, I'm just looking at another quote here. The music of the spheres resounds when the current of joy is in motion. The music of the spheres fills space when the heart is stirred to tremor by the cosmic force. So joy allows the music to be, it's the lines through which, it's the sort of the strings that vibrate, allowing us to hear and feel the music of the spheres and register, which is joy, to hear and feel and know and sense the music of the spheres, which is the original song of creation, is to be at one. And through that alignment, we experience the original joy of creation.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think in you those moments slip in and talk about alignment. I just keep going back to this idea of like raking these leaves. There's that concept too of chop wood and carry water. And you find, and then you find these little moments of beauty, and you see the joy of the universe even in the strife and struggle of the day to day. And we're going through that right now as collectively, and you're not alone. Everyone is feeling this together. Like one of the things that Kelly and I were always talking to each other about is, if one of us is feeling something, we start to check in with everyone. Is anyone else feeling this? And 9 times out of 10, there's like 3 or 4 of the people in our group. Whether it's you, Michael, or people up here at the Mount, everyone's feeling the same thing at the same time. It's all being filtered through our own personalities, our history, our vehicle. But it's like this energy is being sent out. Okay, here's what you guys are dealing with today. And the more that we can move into dealing with this as a group and experiencing this as a group, you start to see that it's the system of one. We are really one system.
We go back to some of our opening statements. If joy is the natural emanation of the soul, then it's the natural emanation of the group soul, the one soul of humanity. Inherently, humanity is a joyful being. But that joy is not released until we've trodden the path of suffering. Because that is the earth path. It's the path. This planet is called the sorrowful star. It's got another, and it's called the blue pearl. And we touched on this before. You know how the pearl comes about because it's an irritant inside the oyster, and so it's always an irritant.
I mean, just the human body. We build muscle by stressing and tearing the muscle tissue and then building it back up. And so
it took me a while to realize that the way to keep building muscles was actually to take a day off from training to allow the body to do it.
Yeah, to rest.
And so it's this rhythmic approach to life. Wow. The thinker taught, there's another quote from Agni Yoga, know how to recognize joy. Among the muses, there is the muse of joy. But you cannot invite this protectress only by beautiful words and thoughts. Do not attempt to threaten and demand, for she comes only by the path of beauty.
Mm.
So beauty is a recognition of the just the glory, the perfection, the music of the spheres, the sacred geometry of life. And so beauty triggers joy.
Mm. Interesting.
So that's why in Agni Yoga, they say the key to building the new world is through the path of beauty.
Mm.
And we mentioned this in a recent podcast with our friend Wade Chumney, that beauty is truth expressed through love in form.
Mm-hmm. That's right.
So when you see and feel beauty, you are reminded of the truth of life, the goodness of life.
Mm-hmm.
Goes back to the Holy Trinity of the Greeks. Inside of each one of us is the true, the good, and the beautiful.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Sounds like a spaghetti western, but
it does a little bit, and it's hard. This is actually interesting because it's hard to sometimes wrap our head around why are we even talking about this in this day and age in this time, and you don't realize this is actually the whole show. This is it. This everything else is really the distraction. So it's not.
Well, it goes back to why are you looking for something when it's already here?
Mm-hmm.
Goes back to the hero's journey that you keep reminding us. It's like, it ain't a hero's journey where you're out trying to look for something outside of yourself. The kingdom of heaven is within.
Mm-hmm.
The joy of the soul is within.
That's right. Whew.
Let it out.
Yeah. Let it ring. And that brings us kind of back to where we are, like with at this present time, this moment, being able to allow joy into your life is probably the greatest gift that you can give yourself. And by yourself, you also giving that gift to everyone else as well.
Well, what you're doing is you're allowing the soul to be the governing body,
Mm-hmm.
or the governing force, the governing energy, the governing principle. And this section on Ponder on This, he completes it with 5 different examples of meditations on joy.
Mm-hmm.
Some of them are prayers, affirmations, meditations. So, and their language is archaic because they come from the past.
Yeah.
The distant past sometimes. But I'd like to read these and stop and just reflect
Joy
as we go through. The first one says, "The joy of the soul irradiates my life and lightens all the burdens which those I meet may carry. The joy of the Lord is my strength, and I develop strength in joy for others." That's like a service affirmation, isn't it?
It is. Actually, it's very rooted in service. Lightens all the burdens.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And then this is carried on the next one. "Joy, like a bird on the wing, I fly towards the sun. I sing in my soul so that all I meet can hear."
Yeah, this pattern is well established. It's about others. It's about the whole.
Yeah. Joy is not something you keep for yourself.
That's right. Yeah. That's a very good point.
You've got to spread it around because it doesn't belong to you.
Yeah.
It is you at your essential level. You
Mm-hmm.
don't. All you own is the responsibility of distributing it.
Right. Yeah.
Not ownership of it's mine.
Yeah.
This is my joy. You can't have any.
Right. Yeah. It's like the pipe doesn't own the water. The pipe is there to move the water.
Yeah. And here's another one, which is something to ponder on. "With industry, I work as doth the ant. With speed, I travel as moves the hare upon its path. With joy I climb, as doth the goat which scales the precipice and stands upon the mountain top. Industry, speed, and joy must be the keynotes of my life. Diligent with the task assigned, speed to ascent with all the Master says, speed on my way to service, and joy to shower forth on all I meet. Such is the way for me. And industry simply means joyful labor.
Yeah.
We're not talking about the Industrial Revolution here.
No.
We're talking about the joyful labor
Right.
revolution.
Yeah.
And then there's another very short affirmation. Let the song of the soul be sounded forth by me, and the clear high notes bring peace and joy to others. My word today is joy. And then finally, for the fifth one, he actually gives a meditation assignment. So he gives you, and those of you listening to the podcast, once the podcast finishes, you want to do this one. It says, sit in perfect silence and quiet for 15 minutes, not negatively drifting into a semi-trance condition, but actively becoming aware of that inner center of stillness and of peace where joy and bliss have their home. So he's saying, if you do this meditation, you will find that place where joy and bliss have their home. It's not some distant place. All of this is inside of us, but we have to open the doors to get to our own dwelling place. It's like in a temple. You've got the outer court, you've got the inner court, you've got the Holy of Holies, the Sancta Sanctorum. So to have access to the love and bliss that is the fire at the center of the temple, you've got to do the work. You've got to build your life. And so I think it's joyful labor. And it sounds really weird to say it that way, Joe. It's like, oh, yeah.
Well, it's very interesting that it's all inside of you, and it's your job. It's your job to share it. It's your job to channel it, embody it, and then share it with others and lighten the burden of others. Share your light.
Which basically said, to be yourself is not to be selfish.
Right. Okay.
It's to be selfless.
Selfless, yeah.
But to be self in action, to be self in love, to be self in joy.
Yeah.
But I get wrapped up in my needs. And when I'm in this sense of, scarcity consciousness, I'm going to grab everything I can see. I'm going to go out and plunder.
Right.
I'm going to go out and do my hunter-gatherer thing on the emotional level, the mental level, as well as the physical level.
Yeah.
Where basically he's saying, no, everything you need is here. Joy is a special wisdom. It lives in you. You are the sun at the center of your own universe. Your job is to reveal that light and let it shine. And when it shines, it will bring joy to the world. Peace and joy to the world.
Yeah. I love that.
What final thoughts do you have? I think I've said all I can enjoy. I didn't know, what it would touch.
Yeah.
Because we've covered joy in a couple of other podcasts in a different way. And this way, it's fundamental. This is like, joy is a fundamental state of being.
Yeah. And being in action, I love that that's so much a part of it, because we've, I've seen just in my own life that the more I am at work at something, and I don't mean just busy work, whether it's the better I feel, the better I am, and the more capacity I have. And there's that capacity to bring more joy and more service into the world. And that's, for me, it turns out that's what it's all about.
Yeah, and towards the end of his life, one of our board members, Joe Mixer, who was Florence Garrigue's nephew, his favorite phrase, as he kept repeating, "Oh, be joyful, oh, be joyful." It's like, in the end, it's like the monks running through town shouting love. In the end, it's like, oh, be joyful. And we've told the story
Mhm.
before when we inaugurated the International Garden of Peace back in 2009. Robert Mueller was the former Assistant Secretary General of the United Nations,
Mhm.
came, and we invited him to sort of give an opening, whatever speech
Mhm.
or something. And instead of talking, he pulled out a harmonica from his pocket and he played Beethoven's Ode to Joy.
Mhm.
That was it. So we inaugurated the International Garden of Peace with the Ode to Joy.
Yeah.
That was brilliant. No words were needed.
Yeah.
So, Joey, be joyful, my friend.
That's right. And if you find yourself stuck in the lower depths of physical manifestation, be of service. Align yourself. Let the joy come through.
Because service removes the clouds.
Mhm.
And a lot of these clouds are self-generated. And service takes us away from self to the service of others,
Mhm.
which is the greater self.
Yeah.
Wow.
All right.
Thank you, Joey.
Thank you, Michael. And be a joy.
Yeah.
All right. Thank you.